Hello, Rick Madan here, President of the Biscayne Neighborhoods Association. I want to welcome all of you back to the BNA YouTube channel, where we discuss the most pressing topics affecting Miami and the broader Florida community. From urban development to community safety, our goal is to bring expert insights to help residents stay informed and prepared. In today's episode, we're diving into a crucial issue for Florida condo owners and associations: the new Milestone Reserve Study requirements, better known as SIRS. Many condo owners have concerns, questions, and even misconceptions about these studies, but they're critical for the long-term safety and financial stability of residential buildings. It's a complicated topic, but to help us navigate this complex topic, we're joined by Sinisa Kolar, principal at the Falcon Group, a leading engineering and architectural firm specializing in building assessments, restoration, and compliance solutions. The Falcon Group has been serving communities since 1997, but soon it'll be many more years, providing full-service engineering and architectural consulting with a focus on safety, sustainability, and regulatory compliance. Sinisa and his team are at the forefront of helping Florida condos comply with the new milestone inspections, structural integrity reserve studies, ensuring buildings remain safe and financially prepared for the future. So welcome, Sinisa.
Thank you very much, Rick. Thank you and BNA for having me, and I hope that we'll be able to tackle some of these topics and provide some clarity on this important issue in Florida.
Well, we thank you and the Falcon Group for being here because this is an important topic. And I think, Sinisa, the best way perhaps for us to educate our audience is by me just asking you some questions, and maybe you can respond to some of them and expand as you prefer.
Sure.
So let's start out by just explaining what the milestone inspection and reserve study requirements are and why were they introduced by the state of Florida?
Sure. So in general, for us at least in Miami-Dade County and Broward County, the milestone, or as we know them in the past 40-year certification, is nothing new. This is something that has been in existence for Miami-Dade and Broward for some time now. However, unfortunately, due to the catastrophic events at Champlain Tower South and the tragedy that occurred, the legislation understood the need that this type of inspection process needs to be implemented not just in the two counties in Florida, but rather throughout the entire state of the Florida. In that case, we have a milestone inspection, and they shortened the time period. Before it was a 40-year for Miami-Dade and Broward. Now we are going back to 30-year, or in Broward County, 25 years for these milestone requirements. Now, the other thing is the reserve study, or SIRS as it's in the new legislation, which stands for Structural Integrity Reserve Study. This is a piece of legislation that, again, has existed, in this case, for the entire state of Florida in the past. Reserve studies were something that was already in the Florida statutes. However, there were certain rules that allowed these reserves to be either voided or partially funded. The new legislation prohibits that for certain aspects of those reserve studies, and the intent behind that is to ensure that the association have sufficient amount of money to address critical components of structural systems in the building and address them if need be and when need comes.
Okay. So, Sinisa, whenever new legislation is introduced, there's always misconceptions people have. So, can you identify maybe one or two misconceptions that condo owners might have about these inspections?
Well, the milestone inspection, again, for Miami-Dade and Broward at least, is nothing new. There is the changes in the legislation basically created a situation where there was a lot of confusion regarding, if I'm living in Miami-Dade and I did my 40-year certification, do I now need to do a milestone inspection, or milestone is new? Technically speaking, it's not new. The legislation allowed local jurisdictions to enforce and control the implementation of this new law, and as such, specifically Miami-Dade County and City of Miami and City of Miami Beach and so on and so forth, adopted the milestone requirements into their own 40-year certification program, merged the two, and basically created one program that satisfied both requirements, both state and local county requirements. There are always, as you said, in a new law and implementation of the new law, there are always going to be some hiccups and obstacles and misunderstandings. But one of the important one is that they are merging these two things together, and once you do either a 40-year or a milestone, you're going to be in compliance with both.
What differences are there with the milestone inspection, and how do they differ with the regular building inspection?
Well, the regular building inspections, again, are not mandatory and something that is left to the association or
So this is mandatory. This is not like the building inspection of building, the board, condo owners can decide whether to do it or not, but this is like they have to do it or they get penalized.
This is mandatory. You're going to be notified by a local building department that you are due. Technically, they implemented a early or advanced notice. So you're going to get a first notice 2 years in advance, then a year in advance, and then you're going to get a notice from the building department stating that you are now required to provide this certification. This is going to happen, again, in Miami-Dade, beginning at the 30 years, and then every 10 years after. In Broward County, I think that they lowered that threshold to 25 years. I don't know, there are two versions of this law. In the first version, it was 30 years or 25 years for the communities that are 3 miles from the coast. That has been amended, and it's been 30 years. But there is a provision that allows local jurisdictions to change the time frame as they deem fit.
So again, not really black and white. There's a lot of moving parts here from a regulatory standpoint, compliance. Let's talk about consequences. Let's say I'm part of a board of a building or condo owners, and I fail to comply with the new milestone inspection. I mean, what consequences as a board, as condo owners, can we face?
Well, several issues are going to happen. Failure to fulfill the requirements of the milestone inspection are inevitably going to lead to a penalties or violations issued by a local jurisdiction. So you can start with, fines, then appearance in front of the magistrate, eventually leading all the way to a potential building being red tagged. So there is the local jurisdiction has the power to basically cut off the power to the building and put a red tag on the building.
Wow.
Extreme circumstances, obviously.
Yeah, well, of course. But let's talk a little bit about the role of engineers, and then let's talk about building safety, because earlier you mentioned Champlain Towers, a very unfortunate event. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I had read when that tragedy occurs, engineers were constantly telling the board of this building that, hey, there are things that you guys need to fix, and they just kept kicking the can down the road and not listening to the engineers. So obviously engineers play a huge role in the safety of condo owners. But as far as the structural components, engineers, what are they really assessing during a milestone inspection?
Yes, the engineers will be assessing the overall condition of the building, obviously based on the visual assessment of the building. And that's maybe the biggest change in the milestone as opposed to the previous versions. Even though it wasn't implicit, it was still allowed, but now it's clearly stated there's a phase 1 and phase 2 of the milestone. Phase 1 is the purely visual assessment of the property, where phase 2 involves either destructive investigations, testing, even some additional calculations, monitoring of the building, and so on and so forth. So engineer is going to assess the condition of the exterior of the building, the condition of the structural elements such as columns, beams, slabs. So basically anything that is providing a vertical support or a horizontal support of the building, meaning resisting gravitational loads or resisting the lateral loads, in which case that will be the wind, the most important lateral load for Florida, right? So we'll be looking at the condition of the concrete. Majority, I would say probably 9% of the buildings in Florida are concrete buildings. So we'll be looking at the condition of the concrete. We'll be looking at the condition of the facade of the building, stucco and paint. We'll be looking at the condition of the roofs. We'll be looking at the condition of the windows and doors, and then providing a general assessment of the property, whether it is safe to be occupied or it requires repairs.
See, I wasn't even aware that there's a phase one and phase two. So let's just say you go into a building, do a phase one inspection, and they fail it. Like, what happens if a building fails a phase one inspection?
Well, if the building fails a phase one inspection, and again, assuming that the engineer understands fully the extent of the failure, the engineer will issue a report, which obviously building failing the inspection, and that'll prompt the building department to basically give a notice to the building that building has a certain amount of time, usually that is 180 days, to perform necessary repairs
Correct
on the building.
Defect, okay.
If the engineer does not fully understand the extent or type of issues on the building, the engineer might require a phase two evaluation, in which case some kind of a destructive investigation might be needed, a monitoring of the building, additional testing of the building and things like that, to allow engineer to fully understand the extent of the damages on the building. Talking about misconceptions, and I may be jumping ahead of myself, but one of the issues that people may not fully understand when it comes to these inspections is that whether the building passes or fails is up to the engineer, not to the building department.
So it's not the city or the state that plays the role, it's the engineer. So it's very important who you hire as your engineer then.
That is correct. And that is one of the biggest points of frustration amongst the condominium associations that I have seen, because technically you can pick 3 different engineers and potentially get 3 different reports.
Wow. So that's something maybe we'll cover more as we go on, because that's a very important point you've just mentioned. But let's talk about, are there any, is Falcon seeing any red flags as you inspect some of these aging condos in any buildings? Are there some big ones that you say, wow, these are things people should be watching out for?
We definitely do. I'm happy to say it is not the rule, it's more of the exception. Majority of the buildings are necessarily not in great condition, but in condition that they are safe to be occupied, but some repairs needed. However, we do come across every now and then a condition that is potentially structurally unsafe. Luckily, that is not the condition that pertains to the entirety of the building, but local isolated areas of the building that either require emergency reinforcement like shoring or anything like that, or even being basically prohibited for occupancy until certain provisions are put in place to secure those parts of the buildings. But yes, we do see certain areas in the buildings, in some of the properties, where some emergency actions are needed.
So let's talk a little bit about financial impact, right? Because engineering firms don't work for free. And, maybe some buildings have extra reserves, some buildings don't. It depends on condo boards, the age of the building, what needs to be done. So from a condo standpoint, what financial challenges do associations face when it comes to funding necessary repairs and maintenance identified in a reserve study?
So that is a very complex topic. And unfortunately, there are a couple of issues that sometimes the legislation and the real life don't really, are cohesive enough, even with the 2 different pieces of legislation. For example, the 40-year or the milestone requirements. And like I said, usually the building department is going to give you 180 days to fix certain things. We all know in the condo world, 180 days is usually not enough time for anything. And that's specifically by design, because in the condo bylaws that govern condominiums, so Chapter 718, specifically says that for certain, if the project exceeds a certain amount of money, you need to have a competitive bidding. In order to have a competitive bidding, you need to have plans. You know, to have the plans, the specifications, you need to have the engineer do that. All of that takes time, and arguably sometimes even more than 180 days to even get to the point that I can have a contractor starting to do the repairs. So all of these are some things that are still kind of in limbo. However, the building departments do understand this, and there are extensions given, assuming that you are doing some work. Now, when you take to the financial aspect of this, so Milestone bring one set of, financial burden or requirements on the building. SIRS, or Structural Integrity Reserve Study, brings a completely different one. Milestone is going to be, let's call it, immediate funding. The Structural Integrity Reserve Study is meant for a long-term funding. And if I may add, that is, if we've kind of learned something, hopefully we learned a lot, but two things that distinguish themselves from a Champlain Tower collapse, that there were two things that were kind of pointed out at least in the public. Number one, there were problems on the building. We were kind of made aware that there were issues on the building. And number two, as you pointed out, there were a couple of years of kind of nothing happening. Whether that was for whatever reason, I'm not going to go into that. But
Right, we can't assume what was in their mind at that time.
exactly. But there was a notion, at least, again, made in public, that these projects are going to cost $10 million or $10+ million. Obviously, for any condo board or any condo association, especially if they don't have the reserves, funding $10+ million, it's not a straightforward process.
Yeah,
And
special assessments, loans. I mean, some people might have to sell their units. They can't even afford to live there.
Exactly, and that is the problem. So when we look into the perspective of, even if I was an engineer on the building and I tell you, listen, you need to do this, it's going to cost you $10+ million, with all your good efforts and positive attitude towards that, you wouldn't be able to start that project within probably 6 to 8 months, maybe even a year, just knowing that you need to fund $10+ million. So because of those two things, that's why we have these two pieces of legislation. Number one, so we make sure that buildings don't come into a situation that they have those structural problems, which is the milestone portion. And then we have, I don't want to have a situation where we don't have the money, which is where the SIRS comes from. So to alleviate the necessity for association to fund a big chunk of money in a short period of time is where the reserves or structural integrity reserve study come into play. So basically, the legislation is stating, I'm gonna use this word, force the condominium associations to have the money ready when the time comes, whether they really think today that they need it or not.
So the idea is, hey, have a piggy bank that you're going to be putting money in because it's coming. So if you were addressing a group of condo owners and board members who are worried about costs associated with these new requirements, is there any advice you can offer them?
Well, so a couple of things. There is going to be at least some cost associated with engineers, that is, or for SIRS, potentially even reserve specialists, because based on the new legislation, the reserve study SIRS can be done by either engineer or reserve specialist. Milestone has to be done by an engineer or an architect. But anyways, there is a cost associated with that. Depending on the findings of those, you might have a big chunk of money coming for collection rather soon, depending on how well your building was maintained. And I think that behind all of this, there is only one word, and that is the maintenance. I cannot emphasize that.
Stay current.
Stay current. Well, I always say this. When it comes to the buildings, somehow we treat them, I don't mean this in a bad way to anybody, but like a stepchild. Like with our cars, we know that we need to change the oil every 5,000 miles,
Right.
right? And somehow we do it, whether the car can run after 5,000 miles.
We
with
just
the
do
oil,
it because we know, hey, we have to do it.
But with a building, if I know that I
There's
have
no
to,
red light.
there is no red light. If I know I have to paint every 10 years, but I go around the building, look, it looks good.
I can
Another
wait another.
And that's the problem.
That's the. So people need to take this seriously.
Absolutely.
Well, you know, I think, Sinisa, we could keep talking on this topic for quite a while, but you know, you mentioned something earlier that if building hired 3 different engineers, they might get 3 different reports, and you know, Falcon has such a good reputation in South Florida. I think it's important for our audience if you can, you know, talk a little bit about yourself, because I mean, I know I gave you an introduction, but really didn't talk about who you are. So if you could talk a little bit about yourself and the firm, I think it'll be important for our audience to know who the Falcon Group really is.
Sure. Thank you. So I am a structural engineer. I have been doing this type of work in Florida for the past 15 years now. And basically the entirety of my involvement with engineering in Florida has been primarily with existing buildings. So evaluation, repairs, restoration of existing buildings, primarily mid-rise and high-rise communities. So the Falcon Group in Florida is also oriented in that direction. We are solely geared towards assisting and addressing any issues, any engineering issues that a building might have. Again, when we talk about existing buildings, we are heavily involved with restoration, with re-roofing, electrical, generator replacement, cooling tower replacement. So basically everything and anything that comes with a existing building. We also work with buildings when it comes to turnover process, which is, again, evaluation of the building post-construction.
So working from the developer's side or the association side?
Association
From the association side, very important.
Yes, so again, assessment of the building as a result of potential construction defects as a result of the original construction, leading sometimes to litigation. We also assisted many associations, for example, after Hurricane Irma, in insurance aspect, again, assessing the building from a perspective of potential possible hurricane damages. So our core business is solely geared, I wouldn't say solely, but 99% towards existing buildings and addressing issues with existing buildings.
So Sinisa, just so our audience has a way of contacting you, what is the website for the Falcon Group?
The website is thefalcongroup.us.
Thank you, thefalcongroup.us. But Sinisa, really, I want to thank you for sharing your expertise on this critical topic. I mean, the milestone inspection and reserve study requirements are not just about compliance, they're about ensuring the safety, longevity, and financial well-being of our residential buildings. You know, for Florida condo owners and board members, understanding these regulations and planning ahead is key. If you're unsure about your building's compliance or need guidance, reach out to experts like the Falcon Group to navigate the process smoothly. So if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated on important community topics. As always, BNA is here to advocate for Edgewater and Miami residents and beyond. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode. And thank you again, Sinisa, to you and the Falcon Group.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, BNA. And I hope that this has brought some clarity to people regarding this topic.
I'm sure it has. Thank you again.
Thank you.